This is a Global Skills Podcast, conversations that shape the future of work and learning. We're exploring how we close the skills gap and build a future where everyone has the chance to thrive. From education to business, connecting people, ideas, and opportunities that drive change. It's about collaboration, curiosity, and creating real impact today. Because every skill learned brings us one step closer to a more inclusive world. The Global Skills Podcast, where learning and opportunity come together. Welcome to the Global Skills Podcast. Today we have Laura Liguori, who's head of curriculum at Britannica Education and a global leader in transforming teaching and learning across international schools. With over 20 years' experience spanning Asia, the Middle East, Northern Africa, Europe, and the UK, she specialises in curriculum innovation, strategic school improvement, and the ethical integration of AI and EdTech. Laura has contributed to major IB and international educational panels, driving conversations on digital discernment, inquiry-based learning, and future-ready skills. A former teacher, advisor, and senior leader, she brings deep insight into how technology and global competitiveness intersect to shape the classroom of tomorrow. Laura, you're so welcome to the Global Skills Podcast.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So I am very interested in the global pathway that you've had, firstly, in your career. How did you get into teaching and education and the work that you do today?
Okay, very happy to share briefly because it spans a couple of decades, so it goes back a bit. So I was in the business world initially as a consultant looking at strategies within corporations, but then entered the world of education. I started off as an English language teacher, then progressed to a classroom teacher, earning my British teaching qualifications, and that was in Thailand. And then after some years of that, I went to a school in Cairo, British International School of Cairo, where I was appointed as what they called an ICT coordinator at the time. But really what we were aiming for was the complete revolutionizing education in that particular school. And this was back in 2011, 2012. We had an outstanding head of school who had a vision that we really needed very early on to be looking at tech integration. And so within that school, we embedded everything from VLEs to Google Education apps, because Google Docs and all those things were a real rage at the time, and progressed to developing a coding curriculum, a computing curriculum, which was in line with changes in the Department for Education here in the UK, and then ultimately started integrating robotics right there and then. And I know robots have moved on quite a bit from there. From there, I went into an IB school in Hong Kong, the Canadian International School of Hong Kong, where I participated in the first robotics pilot, I believe, in Hong Kong, where my class were each given their own robots. And the goal there was really to develop the children's capabilities to use robots as part of their learning experiences, and then to broaden that to a total STEM integration. So using robots as a way to enhance their learning in science and mathematics and design, which was very exciting. From there, I moved on to senior leadership roles within schools in the UK, where we were integrating as well computing curricula and technology. I have to say in Asia, schools are a bit more far ahead in terms of the implementation of high-level digital tech integration in AI than perhaps in the West. Subsequently, spent about a half a year consulting and integrating robotics within an international school in Europe. So it's been quite an exciting path. But after 21 years of being an educator, I wanted to find another way to have impact in the global arena, and hence joined Britannica Education. Whereas head of curriculum, I am, as you stated, very much involved in leading global campaigns where we are establishing thought leadership, which focuses on mainly digital technology integration and AI integration, not only across schools, but within governments. Shortly, I'll be going to Saudi Arabia to be speaking to the Saudi Arabian government and looking how they can integrate digital technologies and AI across their schools in line with their 2030 vision. And so this is a way to have genuine global impact for children across the world in the role that I'm currently doing.
Amazing. What a career that you've had. I'll maybe touch on that point, though, that you said at the end of heading to Saudi, and I've been reading so much about Dubai, and obviously as economies previously focused on oil. And I remember when the digital transformation started happening 5-10 years ago, they started to look at maybe this was the I guess, the new evolution for their industries. But it seems like they're really doubling down on AI. And the fact that you're going from a schooling perspective, what are you seeing there versus maybe what's happening in the West?
Absolutely. Well, the Middle East, I'm based in London and I looked after all our global regions. The Middle East, there's a heightened awareness that in order to ensure that their economic plans and their human capabilities of their workforce of the future are able to progress their economies, you have countries across the Middle East who are adopting AI national curricula. Saudi Arabia has done that. Egypt has done that. In fact, I'm speaking at a conference in Egypt in a couple of weeks' time, as well as the UAE and other neighboring Gulf states. The UAE seems to be taking the lead at the moment in terms of they currently have future schools. And for anyone who's interested, looking at a GEM school in Cairo, I think it's Science and Research School. This is truly the wave of the future. So just addressing, why are these countries investing lots of money in infrastructure, in curricula development for AI integration and digital integration is because they already can project what those future jobs are going to be. And they know that a lot of existing jobs as they are now will go away. That means that their children will need a skill set where they can get the AI to serve them in their roles. So they have to have those critical skills that they can use the AI effectively within these future jobs to progress the economies of the future for these particular countries. And so they are really advancing at a very rapid rate, which is phenomenal. Schools are a couple of steps behind, and that they're trying to move at pace with the 2030 visions that most of these countries have. I think Egypt's is a 2040 vision now, that they're saying that, look, we can predict the jobs of the future in each of our economies. These are the human capabilities and the skill sets we're going to need. Schools, what are you going to do to ensure that these skills are developed so the children who are 8 or 9 years old now will be the people of the future who can perform well in these jobs to keep the economies vibrant and growing? However, I just want to say that in a lot of the countries, there are the struggles of infrastructure and equity. So you will have in certain parts of these regions where children just do not have access to internet. And so we talk about the notion of digital poverty in certain areas of the countries. And these are what the governments are looking at, how to bridge that gap to ensure that every child in their country has an opportunity to be a significant contributor to the workforce of the future. It's moving at a very, very rapid pace, for sure.
It's incredible how fast it's changing and how countries that seem to have a lens into the future, you can already see the race. You can see who's going to win the race based on these strategic moves that are happening now. I think what I'm excited about, and actually it was what inspired the name of the business that I'm CEO of, Abodu, this idea that can we democratize access to learning and working for all? And I think with AI, that is possible if smart planning happens. When you reference future schools, taking an example of a future school, how different is a future school compared to, say, a traditional school?
It's quite different. And I'd realize, just to follow up quickly compared to the West, just very, very quickly on what we're observing in the West, I think that I think there's a lot more risk taking in the Middle East and Asia. I do think we have a lot of compliance related and regulations we have to be careful with in the West. So, we need to make sure that we're in compliance. But we also, I think there's a caution on the impact this is having on children and them as young people. And there's, a whole host of concerns about the impact, that this could have if it's not managed effectively. Therefore, I think that's why the West is potentially a bit behind, not in a negative sense, but behind in terms of moving forward.
What's the difference between a future school and a school of the West, for example, as it is today?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is if we look at a school anywhere in the world in a traditional sense, right, if we go way back to the days where you've got the blackboard and the textbooks, okay. And then you've got schools who are progressing more towards online textbooks, for example, or you've got certain curricula where there are no textbooks at all. But if we look in the traditional sense of the word, you would potentially still have a lot of teacher-centric approaches to teaching. We're talking on a global level, although it's moving more to student-centered. You would have more the expectation that learning that comes out is more based on memory and recall and facts and computational approaches, solving mathematical problems. And then in the world before the internet, your content would be as extensive as your teacher's knowledge and your textbooks. So this is all changing. So what we have now is we still have a lot of schools globally. I mean, we just finished a pilot study in schools in South Africa, which were very textbook based. And then they put our solution in, and Britannica solution. They said, my gosh, our world has opened up to all this information we never had before. So the amount of information, the fact that we've got internet, the fact that we've got access to an abundance of information, even more traditional schools are realizing that if they're able to, and they have the infrastructure and the funding, they have to integrate these online solutions into everyday teaching and learning. That starts to drive curriculum adaptation because, for example, your curriculum objectives, which may have been quite narrow in the past, they start to expand and turn more from, we're going to give you a scenario. We're going to give you a situation, and you've got to use your problem solving and reasoning skills and do some critical research to see how you might solve that problem and to explain and justify your reasons for doing so. So traditional schools have focused less on those skills of the future, which is critical thinking, problem solving, reasoning, digital literacy, ethical use of AI, using AI with intent. And so the teachers are trying to understand, how do they actually teach these skills, whether implicitly or explicitly? And there's a lot of open area about how that can be done. And then the children who are born of this age are saying to teachers, we have all this stuff coming at us now, we want to use it. And so it's sort of a little revolution within classrooms where I think that we're seeing skills of the future going from children are going to have access to open AI systems, right? They're going to have access to chat GPTs and AI tools. And that is sort of going to give them an abundance of information, although we have to say with caution about misinformation, disinformation, hallucinations, and all that sort of thing. But the fact is they have that information. Great. So what are they going to do with it? And so teachers, to avoid something called cognitive deficit, which is a concern with the advent of AI, they're going to have to model how to use AI with intent to integrate it into everyday teaching and learning, whether they use that to produce their lesson plans and their presentations, to developing a little digital ecosystem within their classrooms where they're facilitating and guiding the children on the best AI tools to use to facilitate their learning. So if we fast forward the tape in terms of where a really truly futuristic school will go, and this is fascinating, and I do believe it will happen, there won't be textbooks anymore. Everything will be on learning management platforms, other sources in addition to open AI. And then what will happen is that the use of virtual and augmented reality is now, it exists, but it'll be increasingly so where children literally reproduce a model, a scientific model that is looking through the virtual reality. It's there in the air, and they can manipulate it in the air. And so your classroom becomes a 3D environment of total immersion. This is so futuristic. So we talked about virtual reality and augmented reality and the elimination of textbooks and relying on sources that are updated every few minutes with this world of information. We can then progress that to robots. But now we're moving to, particularly in China, where you have a robot that looks a bit human. For children, it's not scary. And they are learning how to use this robot, say, as a tutor or as a learning tool, like they would a PE kit, where let's say you're looking at perimeter or area, and then you want to code the robot and command it to do various things to prove and demonstrate that you understand conceptually what perimeter and area are. You can code a robot to make those moves. So they're developing all those critical skills to get the AI to serve their needs. Now we've got the whole advent of agentic and chatbots. And we were having a webinar yesterday talking about the use of AI in an English language learning context. But at the moment, we can't rely on these chatbots genuinely providing personalized tutoring, because this is the next stage of things where you've got the adaptive AI, you've got the personalization of learning to the point that when it can start to pick up on the human interaction, it will give more authentic responses to the problems that the children are trying to solve in terms of their academics. And so there is a school here in London for IGS, I think it was IGCSE levels, that every child had their own AI bot online, not a physical robot, that they were studying for their IGCSEs over a 1-year period, going through a personalized learning pathway that the AI generated, that they were learning through that pathway. Okay, there was a teacher in the room. Now, that got down to the very bare bones of skills gaps and what do they need to do in hand study, and highly personalized to their skills, abilities, and knowledge. So, I mean, I had an educator say yesterday that, all this AI is going to replace teachers. I personally do not think so, because everything that, when you read about, we still need that human capability. So if you have self-directed AI learning platforms, and children will gain skill acquisition with that, we talk about things like digital fatigue, a lack of motivation. Where does the human interaction come into place to test the transference of knowledge and skills into the real world? So I think I'm entering into this thing where schools will become very futuristic, almost virtual, future space-like sci-fi type things in the future. But I can't see teachers being replaced simply because we're still human and the social emotional needs. And so just very quickly going back to that school for the IGCSE, the AI doesn't know when a student's having a bad day. It doesn't know what happened to the student in the morning, or did they have breakfast or not. So every moment that student's engaging and they're adjusting that learning pathway, they're not picking up on the nuances of what it means to be human. So potentially what the AI is telling is not an accurate picture of that student for that particular day. So it's very exciting about the future. But we have to remember that we as educators really need to guide and facilitate and to manage this, because we're human at the end of the day. But schools are going to have to think very, very critically, very smart about what they're going to put in place. The children are getting exposure to these technologies whilst maintaining the balance between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence, if that makes sense.
It does. That brings me to another point, because it sounds like some schools are really future planning very well. Others are not, but they will follow those that are setting example. But then equally, we have leaders from industry coming on this podcast. And what I'm not really hearing is cross-pollination of the future planning.
Right.
And so how do we know that the schools are in sync with where industry are forecasting where the roles are actually going to be, so the curriculum does actually align, so that when we're trying to forecast for the 8-year-old today, what opportunities will be there for her or him in 10, 20 years' time? Do you see much synergy in the planning between education and industry anywhere in the world?
No. And this is an interesting topic that you've brought up, because about 3 weeks ago, I was in a roundtable discussion at Chatham House with the India Global Forum. And I think I'll use this as an example because this came up. So India and the UK are looking at, the transference or the sharing of skilled workforces between the two countries. And a very common theme in that is the children's ability to navigate AI for the jobs of the future. And so the second tier of this is, how are schools in India preparing those children, and how are schools in the UK preparing those children? And at the moment, there isn't a sharing of between schools. There is a notion of deeming qualifications received at the end of secondary. Are they equivalent in terms of core competencies with the navigation of AI? And there is a notion that industries should be forming partnerships with higher education institutions, maybe all the way down to secondary, to be talking to them about, these are the jobs that we see, that we're going to need in the next few years, even though you've got, an 8-year-old who's not going to be coming for a while. But how do we collaborate? Every couple of years, how do we form a sort of an understanding between what we're going to need in our workforces across industries and what you're offering at university level? And now the technology is progressing at such a rapid rate, it's too late to wait to university level to start developing these skills, because they have to, I'd say at least from the age of 11 or 12 now, they have to be on this journey within schools and younger. So what we were talking about was a couple of things. That first, we need some sort of partnering between industries and universities, and say in this case, in the UK and in India, to formulate what are the skills of the future? What offerings will universities be doing? But then you have to go to the next level and say, okay, what qualifications by secondary, what competencies do the children need in these areas, in addition to core subjects, because we still need to read and write, and in order for them to gain entry into universities, that could potentially shift the entry requirements. So they're starting to talk about the notion of that kind of coming together and developing the very thing that you've raised. However, then how does the synergy develop between, say, in this case, teachers in the UK and teachers in India? Well, it's not at the moment. So they're looking at something called a global teacher competency model. The competencies that teachers of this day and age will need to develop to impart those skills and knowledge on the children. And I asked the India Global Forum, they talked to governments. I said, well, where is it at? Have they started a competency model, or is it finished, or where is it? And they said, this is at the earliest stages. So now what's coming out is the notion of teacher competency models, which should cut across all curricula, no matter where you are in the world.
The other point of AI is that it is empowering or upskilling or reskilling the person at a younger age than ever before. Where when I came through school, you had to do higher education as an entry to any sort of professional career. It was the minimum. Then it became the master's 10 years ago. That's your next level. But now, if we're equipping young people with these skills, then really many academies, when they complete school to get them industry ready, might be as attractive or more attractive than higher education. And again, is that gap? I mean, I think governments are trying to do it with micro-credentials, but again, they're not all synced. There's no a piece of work we've worked on European projects for the future of, say, generative AI and the future of cyber skills is to have a live skills ontology, connecting skills, jobs with courses, so that there's this pathway, a proper learning pathway that can be created for wherever someone is. But are we doing the same now, do you think, at secondary level, where children that are coming through can really see pathways to apprenticeships, academies, higher education, and then beyond that, understanding the job pathways? Or do we have a lot of work still to do in that domain?
I think in terms of the traditional pathways, doctors, lawyers, teachers, I know in the International Baccalaureate, A level, if you look at Cambridge A level, for example, and then there's certain pathways and what they would apply for at university, and then they will have certain courses that have to take, and then you'll see if you want to be a doctor, you're taking biology or physics or chemistry, something like this. On the list is not yet the AI related skills, entrepreneurship, data protection, sort of coding, various, sorts of skills where they have the ability to work with AI in the context of those jobs. So no, I'm not aware of, it may start to be developed, but I'm not aware of where there's a particular pathway that they have to engage in addition to, say, more traditional subjects to qualify them for those entries into the, higher education scene. I think that higher education is still very much on a traditional footing. And I think the concern, I mean, I know we're in that roundtable, one of the concerns is, well, the technology is just moving so fast. But we as humans, who are ironically creating this technology, the education world is not really able to keep pace. And will we be too late? Will we find a lot of unemployed young people? And where would that talent come from?
Yeah, well, I mean, unemployment, if I just take Ireland, where I'm located, unemployment rates are relatively low overall at 4%, but for young people, they're 3 times that. And that's rising rapidly.
Right.
And I think it's heart-wrenching when young people are spending thousands on education and even the time commitment. And when you're a young person, you have that dream in your heart, don't you? The world's my oyster. I've worked really hard. They've also survived through the pandemic period where they had to not socialize. And now they're at the other side and the jobs aren't there. Or if they are, people with more experience are getting them because companies they're inundated. I'm speaking to global heads of talent acquisition and they're saying it's a 10x increase in applications in some cases. So I think the point that you're making, it's already happening and we need to rapidly catch up.
Absolutely. I mean, my own daughter, who was working for a corporate intelligence firm in her first job out of, graduate school. And she said, do you remember, well, I can't disclose reports because it's quite intelligence, but do you remember all those reports that, I used to have to do the research and the digging? Well, they're all AI generated now. And now she's moved on to another company, but she said, I have real concerns about that because, the fact checking and the human element, but they're saying it's reducing costs. So those reports would usually take her about 8 hours to turn around, and AI can do it so quickly because they have access to all that information. Well, then how would her job have changed from writing those reports and gathering the research, which the AI can now do, to her, checking and critically examining those reports if she was still in the same job? Well, she said, I wouldn't have been prepared to use those kinds of critical skills. I was trained to write the reports. I wasn't trained to analyze the reports and pass judgment about the accuracy or the relevance to the needs of the clients who asked for the reports. Instant skill shift within months. And that's really scary. And people of her generation are telling me, we have all this education. We're now being trained for particular jobs, and it's even happening again in the area of compliance. She's like, there's a chunk of this job in compliance is going to be AI related. So the AI is sort of this scary monster creeping up on these young people who are saying, well, hang on, I'm hired for one job and overnight it changes. And then I have to scramble to see what skills I'm going to develop. Which skills will be AI proof in the future? And nobody has the answer to that. So then like you say, you have thousands invested in education, families going into significant debt to have their children study the subjects that they need. Maybe what has to happen, and I think with regent changes or announcements in the DFE in this country, I think they are starting to look more at those vocational related skills. I think they're starting to look at other pathways because not everybody will want to go the traditional subjects, right? No, but not everybody will see the value of some of the traditional subjects. I mean, there's some people who will want to, and they'll figure out what they're going to do. But should there be an alternative kind of higher education, a model of education that is specifically targeted at this kind of futuristic model of the jobs, which is really now? Because what the two examples I've just given, it's just right now. And the scary statistics about, 90% of jobs that exist now will no longer exist, down to surgeons, for example. They can have robots performing surgery now in certain places. So I think that I would be interested to know if there are any think tanks really examining this and shifting a model of higher education to prepare young people for the future, short and longer term.
Well, if any of our listeners today are listening and thinking, well, we know of one, but the more leaders I'm getting to talk to, the more I'm seeing that there is a gap around this expert group coming together from the different areas to really forecast the future and move very, very quickly for a solution. I know one thing that we're offering organizations and educational bodies it's a skills AI readiness report. So using our taxonomy and ontology to help them say, well, these are the skills that are coming. So let's redesign curriculum now. Let's not wait a year,
Right.
2 years, which is that traditional time period.
Right.
I think what's brilliant about you, Laura, is you have a global lens on education and you're seeing best in class of what's happening. And I think it's just shone a light on how far behind some areas are or some regions or countries are. And there's so much that could be done. But
a lot of educators, even when I was still in education, we think, oh, it's future. Oh, it's future. It's not now. It can't possibly. It's future. It's not like people are putting it off. It's just the balance between educators are still required to hit exam results, attainment levels, A levels results, IB, higher exam results, because, there's still this model very much towards its results driven and getting children into, universities in the traditional sense. And so educators are like, how do we have the time to look at all of this? So if you're going to have a sort of the more traditional model of education going along while in the world, all this is going on, when does the educator take a breath and be able to genuinely look at implementing it? And in my role and what I do here is talking to schools, every day about, well, we know, and educators are saying this is now. I mean, it's now more than ever. It's on our doorstep. So leaders, what roles can they play? Well, give some vision, give some strategic direction, allow for time for integration, small steps, involve the students to be co-constructors of this digital world to support the teachers, and just go this process of embedding. And a lot of schools are making that start, and a lot of schools are doing absolutely fabulous things. However, it's still the question of, well, is it going to really raise attainment levels? Is it really having an impact? Well, we don't know yet, but what we do know are the things that you can look for to see if they're making impact. And I think as soon as educators are able to have that time to try things in a meaningful way with intent, and then use strategies to measure that impact and say, that is making a difference. This child's moving from memorization and recall of facts to actually high-level problem solving and reasoning and critical thinking. And that's what we want in schools. That's the shift we've been taking even before AI really started driving forward. But the AI just speeds that up as well. And guess what? It's good for their future skills as well. And this is the thing. It's sort of, we know we need to move fast, but there's the fear that if we haven't thought about the impact on the children and the impact on their academic attainment and their personal well-being, are we being irresponsible? Where's the safeguarding in this? And this is a whole other debate that we could get into. But these are key factors that why schools are just that much behind. The pressure to have those results in the traditional model that parents may be expecting, the time to define what their schools are going to look like in the next few years, and then to look at the changes and the impact that has, it is massive. And it's not something schools can do overnight.
We have a closing tradition for the podcast where I ask two questions, but you only have to answer one.
Okay.
My first question is there a skill that you had as a young person that you don't use anymore that you'd like to use again? And if so, why? Or speaking to young people today and their fear or anxiety about the future, and what advice would you give them in terms of, is there a skill that you could develop while you're looking for a job or trying to do further education? Is there any skill that you think would help them future-proof as much as possible?
I would say to young people, like I say to young people I know, is first of all, you know a lot more than you think you do. And you have a lot of these future skills already, because this is the age that you've grown up in. And if you're feeling as though your teachers are not as skilled as you are, well, maybe. But I would say that, say that you're making an application for a university, look at all of the sort of skills that have developed in your secondary career. Everyone's been using the internet since, day one. I'm sure you've used a lot of applications and apps in your learning. Think about all the things that you've used and how you've used them and how that's helped you to develop your ability to think about what you're learning. What papers did you read that you were most impressed with, where you actually gathered some information and then you were able to sort of form your own opinions or hypotheses about what was going on in that particular topic? Think about something that you wrote before you started using technology in your learning and after, and look at the difference and see how did it help you. Also, I would say is, don't forget you're human, and be aware of how the use of tech can, and I don't want to use this word with young people, but it can dehumanize us a bit. There was a study out there by Cambridge University Press saying that this is having an impact on their mental well-being. So if you have an over-reliance on AI, or you've had an over-reliance on digital tech, or maybe you feel you've used it too much and it's making you feel as though you're using your ability to communicate in the real world, try to think about all the things you do to be effective communicators. Don't be afraid to still be who you are as a person and engage in what it means to be a human being, and use whatever you're using with technology with intent, and ask yourself, why am I using it? Do I need it? Is it going to help me? Is it going to make life easy for me? Or is it going to challenge me more to think about things the way humans are supposed to be thinking about things? So I think bottom line is that you are in a world that is being driven forward through technology. Don't forget you are human. Don't forget you can control what you use and when you use it. Don't lose sight of that. And I think that that's what I would say. And when you're making application to university, demonstrate how your natural intelligence is much more powerful than any artificial intelligence you might use to support your studies.
That was really, really good advice. And, I'm just thinking about this overall conversation.
for me, what you're articulating is the power is still in our hands, whether
Yes.
you're young, whether you're a teacher, educator, even a company leader. And it is around action now. And I think it is playing to our strengths as a human, as you say, if we can bring education and industry closer together. And if we don't know the future, that's okay. But together, we're much stronger than operating in silos. This has been a
Yeah.
really nice interview. Just want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Whether you're leading a business, shaping education, planning your next career move, or just starting out, you're part of a global conversation about how we learn, work, and grow. If you've enjoyed this episode, tap subscribe so you never miss the latest insights. And if you've a moment, leaving a quick rating really helps people find the show. For early access to new episodes, event invitations, and the chance to connect with others driving real change, join the community at globalskillspodcast.com. The future of skills belongs to all of us. Proudly sponsored by Abodu, empowering organisations and educators with world-class skills technology to build a better future for everyone.